lease for Unit 13A shouldn't have existed. The building's website skipped from floor 12 to floor 14, the way hotels do to soothe superstition. Yet the realtor's email arrived with a keybox code and a humming promise, an unlisted loft with skyline views. That was what Tom read aloud to the others at the corner cafe. Lisa with her white-knuckle coffee, Kevin flicking a cracked phone case, Sarah in scrubs, David with a backpack of grad school grief. A good deal is a spell all its own. They signed, and the city shifted a fraction of an inch to make room. The elevator panel had a blank between 12 and 14, but when Tom pressed the blank, the card trembled, then dipped. Metal cables thrummed like a bass string plucked by an unseen finger. The doors opened to a hallway that hadn't been photographed by anyone alive, linoleum, the color of old teeth wall sconces that wore little collars of dust, and a line of windows filmed with oily daylight. Unit 13A was at the far end. A thin brass plaque showed a 13 that had been scratched into, made to look like a B, then scratched again. The door swung easier than it should, as if it had been waiting. Inside, the air felt chilled and recently vacated. The loft was large, a corner unit with high ceilings and a wall of windows overlooking the river. The furniture was staged a gray sectional, a glass coffee table cutlery still banded in plastic. On the island lay a folder lease, copies a move-in checklist, 5 key fobs. The last page was a punch card, day 1 through day 13, printed in red. Somewhere in the vents, a thin rush, like a breath traveling through metal, whispered along the ceiling. "Place is a steal," Tom said, sweeping his phone in a slow pan for B-roll. He'd been promising his subscribers a return to urban legends. A cursed floor would make the algorithm purr. From the hallway, a distant elevator bell chimed, the note warped, as if recorded badly, and played back on failing speakers. They chose rooms. Lisa took the one with the electrical closet at its back wall. She said she liked the hum. It proved the heart was beating. Kevin claimed the corner with the mirror, a huge built-in with blackened silvering that made him look like the ghost of any future he didn't want. Sarah picked the window room for the dawn she'd only sometimes see after night shifts. David took the smallest, saying he needed less space to think. Tom left his gear cases in the living room, declaring it the production studio for their reclaimed floor vlog. They opened the punch card and laughed at the gimmick. 13 days they'd be out by then. It was just a month to month while they found better. The refrigerator motor kicked on with a wet cough, then settled into a persistent drone, like someone speaking through a wall in a language you almost understand. That first night, they ordered cheap takeout and ate cross-legged on the floor. Tom filmed confessionals. What scares you? What do you think about unlucky numbers? Do you believe in repetition? The city outside threw gold at the glass and then took it back. At midnight, a faint tapping came from the glass coffee table, a nail on crystal regular as a metronome for a patient heartbeat. Kevin leaned down, found a loose coaster vibrating against the tabletop. He wedged it under and smiled a tight, embarrassed smile. See physics. But his eyes kept slanting toward the window. They slept badly. Dreams of falling arrived like spam emails, identically worded, delivered to separate inboxes. Somewhere above the ceiling, a slow glide of ductwork sighed a long, exhausted exhale that made the light fixture answer with a shy rattle. Morning broke, bleached and cold. Sarah brewed coffee, and the smell made the place feel almost livable. Pipes clanged in the walls, 2 empty knocks, then a pause, then 2 more, like someone rehearsing the idea of knocking without committing to it. Lisa ran fingers along the faceplates, checked the breaker panel. Whoever wired this did it like a dare," she said, half admiring, half appalled. A coil of cable in the closet was zip-tied in a figure 8. "Don't touch anything until I test it." Tom mapped out shots. He clapped once to sync audio, and the clap came back a fraction late from the hallway, a lagging twin. "Echo's weird," he said. But his lens lingered on the punch card taped above the microwave. Day 1 had a fresh hole punched through the red circle. The hole looked older than it should, like a scar that predated the skin. At 11:13 a.m., the elevator moaned down the shaft, a mournful slide followed by a thud that landed in their bones. They looked at each other, 5 heads tilted like sunflowers toward a cloud. "Probably a heavy delivery," David said, but he didn't stand up to check. The building superintendent, a careful man with careful shoes, knocked in the afternoon. He carried a clipboard and a set of master keys on a lanyard knotted like a rosary. His knuckles made a crisp, hollow rap on the door, each knock echoing softly down the hall and returning thinner as if shaved by distance. "Welcome," he said. "Most people keep to the lower floors. You 5 are independent-minded." He made a note and then another without writing anything. "No parties, no candle burning. The windows latch for a reason." "You mean safety," Sarah said. "Of course," the superintendent said. He paused as though waiting to hear something. A faint squeal threaded through the corridor, like a violin played a room away by a child who had never seen a violin before. If anything breaks, call. He glanced at the mirror. For a second, his expression collapsed into something that resembled pity. Then he recovered, nodded, and left. That evening, the city turned stormy. Clouds as heavy as a promise wedged themselves between the river and the high-rise, and rain scribbled diagonally across the view. Wind pressed against the windows, so the glass sang a thin whining note that rose and fell as if taste-testing the strength. Tom set up a tripod and did what he was good at, speaking into the red eye. "Unit 13A," he said, "found by accident, opened by courage." He told the story the way cities prefer, as a dare that you can win just by telling it. No one mentioned the rumor that Sarah had found in a thread with too many deleted comments, that the 13th floor existed only when someone believed it did. Thunder boomed somewhere above the river, low and deliberate, and afterward the building gave a reluctant creak, like bones rotating in a low joint. The power flickered once. Lisa stood with her hand on the wall, as if listening by fingertip. From the electrical closet came a taut humming, a wire's tight song, the pitch spiking and then flattening like a cardiogram that refuses to decide. "Bad neutral," Kevin said. "Bad story," Tom said, and smiled the way you smile at a joke about tripping when you're walking near a cliff. They turned in early. The punch card over the microwave winked in the stove light. Someone no one admitted it had made a mark next to day 2. Not a hole, just a pressure white line that suggested a future hole. The mark was at a slant, like handwriting. In the hallway, the elevator doors breathed apart, and together a hush-hush that barely registered until you tried not to hear it. Tom dreamed of a woman on a window ledge. She was barefoot, toes curled over city air. She was not weeping, not pleading. She was neither dare nor threat. She was a decision. When she turned her face toward him, the view lost all depth. He saw only her eyes and a smear of river light and the black slit of the open window cutting the night into a before and an after. He woke to the whisper of the curtain. The curtain rings ticked softly along the rod, a bead string of taps counting to 13 with patient, accurate malice. He got up, crossed to the window, and checked the latch. Still locked. The rain had stopped. The city below was a wet map that no one could fold right again. On day 2, they found the first thing the last tenants had left behind: a corner of cardstock lodged behind the baseboard by the mirror. Kevin pried it out with his thumbnail. It was a punch card like theirs. Day 1 through day 13. Day 13 was punched, and next to it, someone had written "open," and then a smeared line like a word written with a shaking hand. "Open what Sarah asked." Behind them, the mirror emitted a dry tick, like the sound a throat makes before deciding to speak. Kevin lifted his phone to capture it. The mirror's surface looked like breathed-on glass. Letters formed there, not perfectly, not legibly, but enough to suggest intention. 13 to 13, down the inside of the silvering like mildew, writing in numerals. Somewhere deep in the plumbing, a sudden rush, a gulping surge made the kitchen sink chatter in its metal cradle. "Okay," Tom said, raising his hands in surrender that was also framing. "We record rules. We respect rules. We don't become the story." A child's laugh, no, the imitation of a child's laugh, played on an old tape recorder, skipped once across the ceiling and was gone. By day 3, the building began keeping the time for them. At 1:13 p.m., a distant intercom buzzed with a mosquito whine, then scratched into silence. At 3:13 p.m., the elevator groaned upward, even though no one had called it. At 11:13 p.m., a very soft footfall, one step only, pressed the hall carpet outside, a hush of weight that made the underlay answer with a papery sigh. Lisa taped the window latches, more for her nerves than for safety. "It's a draft," she said. Drafts can sound like anything if you've got the story first. The taped latches clicked dryly under her thumbs, little insect clicks, each one a tiny sealed envelope. David started a diary in a composition notebook. He wrote the hour of each anomaly, the room it occurred, and the possible cause. Then he listed the impossible one in brackets, the way a statistician writes the truth before finding the right words to bury it. When the fridge cycled, the compressor groaned like a tired elevator that wanted to stop, but couldn't remember how. That night, Sarah came home late. The hallway was dim. One of the sconces had burned out while no one watched. She heard the elevator cable squeal, then settle to a hush as the car parked itself one floor below, like a beast crouching. She let herself in. The living room was blue with screen light. Tom had fallen asleep with footage rolling. On screen, Unit 13A in daylight smiled back at its night self. The punch card over the microwave looked in the bright video like a calendar on the last day. From the bathroom, a slow, deliberate drip counted time into the sink. Drip, pause, drip, a stubborn metronome that refused to be hurried. Sarah turned the handle tighter. The drip stopped. One beat later, something in the wall answered with a hollow bloop as if swallowing. She didn't scream, and that was how it started to win. At 2:00 a.m., Tom's camera clicked on by itself. He had left it on interval. The lens faced the window and took stills every 13 seconds. The city glowed, cooled, brightened. In one frame, the curtains were still. In the next, they were slightly apart. In another, a reflection appeared in the glass, a pale oval that might have been a street light, if streetlights had cheekbones and the patient posture of decision. Tom scrolled through the frames, heart scanning faster. With each click of the camera, the shutter made a crisp, insectile snap that sounded exactly like a finger counting down. He looked up at the actual window. The tape wasn't broken, but the latch had nudged itself as if bored. He told no one in the morning. Instead, he made eggs cracked into a bowl that had lived its previous life under someone else's mouth, and asked if anyone wanted to go exploring the building. The superintendent had mentioned a rec room that no one used. In the hallway, the exit sign hummed with a low electrical burr, a neon throat clearing itself, clearing itself, clearing itself. They took the elevator down, then up, then down again, as if promising the machinery that they respected its work. The rec room was a maze of abandoned furniture and a ping-pong table with a net that drooped like a slack grin. A bulletin board near the door had flyers for tenants' events that always happened on the 14th, never the 13th. A corner was dedicated to a memorial notice. A woman's name flowers stapled around the borders, the word community printed too many times to mean anything. Sarah stood reading it longer than the others. The date was 13 months ago. Behind them, the elevator cables thrummed, a low cat purr that carried through the concrete as the car rose, then halted, then rose again. "Back up," Tom said. "I need a rooftop shot of the skyline at sunset." "Why sunset?" David asked. "Because it looks like an ending," Tom said, and then wished he hadn't. They returned to the loft near dusk. The punch card now had 2 clean holes punched. No one admitted touching it. No one admitted noticing when the second hole appeared. As night came on, the building made its old person orchestra of settling noises, pops and ticks and groans that sounded almost like speech if language had been invented to name the shape of fear. "Tomorrow," Tom said, "we make rules on camera. 13 of them." He liked the way number symmetry made chaos blink. They each went to their rooms. Down the shaft, the elevator's side doors, whispering together, and the silk shush of cables traced a long vowel none of them had learned to pronounce. Wind threaded the window seams with a faint whistle, like a thread being pulled through cloth. In the electrical closet, a resistor sizzled soft as meat, hitting a pan, and then instantly going quiet. Tom lay awake counting the seconds between the camera's interval shots still clicking from the living room. Click. 13. Click. 13. Click. On the 13th click, he thought he heard something else pressed into the spaces between a woman's voice, not saying help, not saying no. Something like, "Wait the way a cliff waits." He slept just before dawn. In that blue hour, the pipes coughed a single wet bark that startled the air, and then withdrew as if embarrassed. The city woke, or pretended to. Day 4 would come, and then day 5, and the rules would multiply like mirrors facing mirrors. The countdown had begun on paper long before it began in them. Outside, the river shouldered past the water, speaking its old water language that no one asks to translate into numbers. Very softly under everything else, a laugh leaked through the ceiling from no floor at all, just a thin ribbon of sound, tied into a bow and left on their pillow. They wrote the rules at the kitchen island because paper felt heavier there. Tom numbered them cleanly, the tip of his black marker squeaking once on the glossy card before the ink ran steady. The marker's nib rasped softly across the cardstock, a dry whisper of felt on clay-white grain. Rule 1, we don't open windows. Rule 2, we don't ride the elevator alone. Rule 3, we don't look into the mirror after 11:13 p.m. Rule 4 through Rule 13 arrived fast, like a fluency none of them wanted to admit having. 13 rules, Tom said, showing the camera the fresh list. 13 days. We are not superstitious. We are structured. The fridge gave a low, agreeable hum like a dog settling at their feet. Somewhere in the ductwork air threaded through a bend and hissed once thin as floss. They all heard it, and everyone pretended it was just the building speaking in its usual throat. Sarah hung the rules beside the punch card as if the 2 calendars might cancel each other out. "There," she said. "Now we have boundaries." From the hallway, the elevator cables thrummed, a bass string drawn quick and then stilled. The bell chimed a warped note, as though it had been left out in the rain. Kevin grinned without mirth. Boundaries heard you. Tom filmed B-roll hands, moving faces, resolving into seriousness, the camera's own reflection in the black oven door. He clapped once to sink a sharp crack that came back a fraction late from the far corner of the ceiling. Audio's got a lag, he said. Or the room does. Lisa disappeared into her electrical closet kingdom. The supply's stable, she announced, but the ground hum is, odd. Her tester beeped twice, brisk beeps that made the closet feel temporarily like a ward with patient monitors. She coiled a length of tape measure and let it snap back. The tape snapped with a bright metallic tick that jumped in the close air. I hate close tolerances, she muttered. They squeal when they fail. David kept writing the log. He had begun to underline the times that matched 13. There were too many lines already. His pen scratched the paper in rushed strokes, little chitinous sounds like beetles discussing something in the margin. By afternoon, Tom needed a stunt. He wanted to break the pattern by naming it on camera, his specialty. Live test, he said. We'll count down. We'll prove nothing happens. No window, Sarah said. Closest we get is the latch, Tom said. Cameras rolling. We narrate. We keep hands in pockets. The apartment's air handler coughed once and then smoothed into a steady, breathy whoosh as if the loft had decided to inhale for them. Rain ticked at the window in a brief spatter, each droplet a small nail-tapping glass, and then giving up. The sky had gone the color of old aluminum. The river was a slate scratch. They set a tripod facing the big corner window. Kevin checked the interval timer, then set the main camera to continuous. The shutter clicked to confirm one brisk tick, followed by the faint, obedient whir of the focus motor. Tom stood a half step to the left of the frame so he could gesture without becoming the show. 13, he said, and smiled as if he owned the number. We count backwards, we breathe. We end at 1. Nothing happens. That's the content. The elevator deep in the shaft groaned once, an old hinge dragged through its arc and then let go. They all felt it through their feet. Not helpful, Kevin said, trying for lightness, and instead landing somewhere brittle. They began. 13, 12, 11. Outside the glass, a far siren made a thin red thread across the city and then slid out of earshot. 10, 9. The tape on the latches gave a tiny papery crackle as the building shifted in the wind. 8, 7. A neighbor above, no floor at all, but the suggestion of one walked a single step. The ceiling gave a soft, cottony thump. 6, 5. The camera's tally light clicked as it wrote to the card, a crisp, tiny metronome keeping their courage and tempo. 4, Tom said, and glanced at Sarah, who shook her head. Don't touch the glass. 3, he said, and took his hands deeper into his pockets. 2. A long, taut note, like a steel wire being pulled through a narrow eye, sang somewhere behind the wall. It rose a half step and then flattened an exhausted violin string, surrendering to a bad knot. 1. Nothing. They let the silence expand. In the silence, a barely audible tick-tick came from the rightmost curtain ring, like a fingernail tapping porcelain in another room. Tom laughed too quickly. We accept the non-event, he said, and turned to the audience he would edit later. This is the shape of a legend, learning it won't be fed. He reached to stop the camera. The window latch clicked. Not loud, just decisive, a little metal syllable that said yes in a language their rules didn't cover. Don't, Sarah said. Tom froze, the good host, who also wanted to win. We documented a latch expansion from barometric pressure, he said, but the quip had no heat. He backed away with his palms out. We keep distance. The latch clicked again, a twin sound, as if agreeing with itself. The second camera, the one he'd aimed at the mirror for coverage, captured what none of them were looking at. Hairline cracks in the silvering tracked down from the top edge like frost, feeling for a path. Very faintly, the mirror released a glassy tick, then another, the sound of a cooling dish between servings. Kevin saw it in the monitor and swore under his breath. We have movement. And the mirrors, composing. Compose later, Lisa said. She had her hand on the rules sheet like it was a ground wire. Step back from the window. Tom stepped back. The elevator below hiccuped, a short jam note, metal teeth catching and then skittering free with a small guilty scrape. And from somewhere inside the wall, the gentle drag of a wire answered as if something were drawing it tight in preparation. Okay? Tom said, voice steady by Will. We'll log the latch and end the bit. They ended nothing. The wind arrived in a single shove, a blunt palm to the glass. The panes gave a high, thin cry that trembled in the frames, and then steadied like a seesaw, learning its balance. The taped latches made a dry peel as one edge lifted and then receded. Tom Sarah said low. Back up, he did. But the window didn't care who stood nearest. It wanted the shape in the room that matched its number. The feed from camera B showed the reflection of the five of them, and beyond them, the reflection of the river crawling toward evening. Near the bottom left a pale oval, hovered not a face exactly, but the memory of one the shape paper leaves burned into the table when a candle guttered too close. The room's air returned a small circular sigh, as if a seal had been broken somewhere and then half reconsidered. End the test, David said. His voice had gone librarian quiet. He reached quick and neat and pressed stop on the main camera. The camera chirped once the polite digital ping of compliance and the red light blinked out. And then, because pride is the last door to close, Tom said, one more establishing shot, and took a single step closer to the window. From inside the wall, the drawn wire sang again higher, the notes stretching like a taut string that wanted to be plucked free. In the shaft, the elevator shuddered one heavy quiver that set the door tracks buzzing like a hive, and then stilled. The latch turned. No hand on it, no gust. It turned with the unhurried certainty of an action that had been rehearsed in the house of a mind for years. The latch's little tongue gave a soft clack as it withdrew. The window's weather strip exhaled a thin, sticky kiss as the sash gave. Tom Sarah said again, but the word wasn't a leash. It was a wish. He was still not touching anything. He was still a half step back. He had followed every rule, but the unwritten one, don't speak to it like you can win. The curtain rings ran a measured rattle along the rod, counting countable 13 taps precise and almost bored. The window opened 3 inches. Tom's expression flickered through 3 thoughts, explain, laugh, retreat. He chose explain. Thermal expansion, he began. The wind chose retreat for him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even violent. It was a small, coy tug like the city taking back a borrowed breath. He leaned, corrected, leaned again. He raised his hands now, and that was the exact gesture the TV hosts make when they're saying we're okay to an audience that has already seen the wide shot. He could have sat down. He could have named it nothing. He could have. Somewhere above, a shoe scraped softly across carpet that did not exist. A single whisper of weight in a corridor drawn over the air. From the mirror, a hairline crack answered with a mosquito pitch ping. The elevator, obliged by some call neither button nor human made, began to rise, its cables humming with a steady iron hymn. Tom looked at Sarah. It was not a long look. Then he turned toward the camera to end the bit cleanly. He took the step a person takes when they are leaving a scene with their dignity. He stepped into the open. The room made no noise big enough to call a stop. The curtain snapped once, a tidy flag crack in the sudden pull of air. The camera on the tripod gave a plastic creak as its head followed the motion, a fraction too late. Far below so far, it sounded like a memory of sound rather than sound itself. Someone in the city said something surprised, and then the street swallowed it. The open window, newly certain, admitted evening like a formality. The air flowed in with a low, continuous hush, the sound of paper being turned somewhere you can't see. No one screamed. That was the horror's preference, as always. It took the breath and left the room tidy. Lisa crossed the room first because someone had to be first and smacked the sash down. The wood thumped into the sill with a firm, furniture-like thud. The latch lever clicked unwillingly back into its seat, a sulky little metal swallow. Sarah had her phone to her ear, the ancient choreography of calling for help already unspooling. Her voice hitched once a soft, involuntary catch in the back of her throat that sounded like a tape snagging. The line rang 1, 2, 3 rings, too polite, too slow. Kevin stared at the mirror because he could not make himself stare at the window. The mirror had decided its fractures were letters now. Open, it suggested the letters a row of pale threads where the silvering had surrendered. A tiny regular tick came from behind the glass, the settled plate sound of heat leaving a thing. David took the composition notebook and wrote Tom's name. There was no word to put beside it that didn't feel like treachery. He wrote window. He wrote we were in the room. He wrote it opened. From the elevator shaft, the car stopped with a fat, rubber-muffled bump, as if bracing itself at their floor before remembering it wasn't invited. Cables thrummed once an afternote and then fell quiet. They waited. That was what they did. They moved the cameras without moving them. They took down nothing. The apartment's systems resumed their domestic opera, the HVAC's mild ocean hush, the fridge's low vow, the faint electrical whine of the exit sign beyond the door. In the bathroom, after a long silence, one obstinate drop fell and found the drain, and the pipe replied with a hollow blink. The superintendent arrived in minutes that had the posture of hours. He stepped into the room, into the geometry everyone else had already tested for safety with their eyes. His keyring jingled once as he pulled the door shut behind him, a sober little chime that seemed embarrassed to be festive. He looked at the window. He looked at the punch card with 2 holes and a pressure line at day 3. He looked at the rules, all 13 of them, as if reading a prayer someone had invented last night. He put a hand to the wall, and for the first time, looked old. "I'm sorry," he said. "We'll make the necessary calls." He did not ask what happened. He did not need the story. The building had already told him. Sarah sat at the island with the composure of someone who has steadied strangers on worse days than their own. "We need to leave," she said. "We can't," Lisa said. She meant not yet. She meant the police will want statements. She meant we owe a narrative to the part of the world that demands explanations where there aren't any. She also meant something to the window that even a window could hear. At 11:13 p.m., the apartment shifted no visible motion, just a soft collective creak as wood glass and wires settled into their night versions of themselves. Far away, thunder rolled like a slow cart across a bridge's wooden slats. Near at hand, the taped latches on the window made a faint, sticky sigh as the tape tried to remember its first adhesion. They did not sleep. The cameras stayed off mostly because leaving them on felt like an invitation. David wrote until the page furred with graphite. Kevin lay on the rug for a while, as if grounding himself to the building would convince it to return the favor. Lisa sat with her back against the electrical closet door, guarding it like a friend in a bad mood. Sarah watched the window and did not blink enough. Just after midnight, the elevator doors down the hall whispered apart. And then together, a silk hush that suggested a visitor without delivering one. A cable pinged once, like a drop of rain hitting a tight wire. When the knock came, it was not from the hall. 3 knocks sounded inside the mirror, not loud, not theatrical. Just 3 dry finger pads on the other side of the glass, spaced with patience. The 3rd knock echoed a second later from the far corner of the room, a hollow little pop, as if a jar had opened where no jar sat. Kevin said no. It was the first time any of them had taught the room a word. The apartment answered with a single floorboard creak, a mild old house murmur that could have been coincidence if coincidence hadn't been replaced by curation. They sat the rest of the night with their rules. They did not open the window. They did not ride the elevator alone. They did not look into the mirror after 11:13. Though the mirror became, as all mirrors do, a perimeter you can't help checking. At dawn, the punch card had 3 clean holes. As the first buses of the morning exhaled at the curb below, their air brakes released a soft, breathy shh that rose like steam and thinned. Inside, the fridge clicked and rested. The apartment swallowed a small gulp of quiet and then gave it back. Tom's microphones lay on the table like sleeping insects. No one touched them. One of them gave a tiny settling crack, a plastic tick, announcing its return to room temperature. They made coffee. They did not say his name while the machines were awake. The kettle sang in a low, sustained thread of steam before subsiding to a breath. A neighbor's radio somewhere on a much more normal floor played a tinny burst of morning talk and then dissolved into static before finding the station again. Sarah poured and looked at the window and said, "Day 4. Lisa, without meaning to, answered day 3. David wrote both. From the ceiling, the faintest tremor ran a tremble of plaster like a whisper being practiced, and under the hum of the city, a thinner frequency arrived. A laugh, barely a laugh. The suggestion of a laugh cut to ribbons by distance, and yet intact enough to be recognized. They drank anyway. Kevin had always been the skeptic. While Tom's death rattled the group and Lisa's gruesome end left them shaking, Kevin clung to the belief that there had to be a rational explanation. He kept repeating, "It's not a curse. It's psychological. It's fear controlling us." But as the 13th day crept closer, even his voice began to tremble. The apartment grew colder at night, as if the walls themselves exhaled a breath that froze the air. Kevin's room had an antique full-length mirror that the landlord insisted was original to the building. Its frame was carved with roses, but time had warped the glass, leaving faint cracks like spider webs. At first, Kevin avoided it. But soon the mirror began calling him. Every time he passed, his reflection seemed delayed by a split second. His eyes blinked later than his real eyes. His lips curved in a grin he didn't make. One night, Sarah heard a noise from Kevin's room. She swore she heard the sharp crack of glass shifting like fingernails dragging across a window. When she knocked, Kevin answered too quickly, as if he had been standing at the door waiting. His face was pale, his pupils dilated. Inside, the mirror had changed. Instead of reflecting the room, It showed shadows crawling behind Kevin. The group insisted it was a trick of the light, but Lisa whispered before her death that the mirror doesn't copy you, it replaces you. Kevin stopped eating. He spent hours standing before the mirror, whispering to it. Sometimes Sarah caught him smiling at nothing. Other times, his reflection moved before he did. On the 13th night, David found Kevin alone, his forehead pressed against the glass. David called his name, but Kevin didn't respond. Then came the sound, a deep, hollow thud skull striking against glass. Kevin slammed his head once, then again harder. The wet crunch of bone splitting echoed through the room, mixed with the shattering crack of the mirror. Blood smeared across the reflection, yet in the shards, Kevin's image was still smiling untouched. By the time Sarah and David pulled him away, Kevin's body was limp, his skull fractured. The mirror, though broken, still reflected him, standing tall, grinning eyes, glowing faintly red. From the broken shards came a faint whisper, layered with the sound of dragging nails, one by one. You all belong to me. Sarah was the only one left with David now. After Tom's body was taken away, after Lisa's lifeless form was found tangled in wires, and after Kevin smashed his skull against the cursed mirror, the apartment no longer felt like a place they could leave. It was alive. Every corner groaned, every shadow breathed, and the number 13 hung above them like a death sentence. Sarah tried to stay strong. She told David they could move out, they could leave before the 13th day ended. But when she called the landlord, the line was always dead. When she tried the front door, it was sealed, welded shut from the inside like it had never opened before. The only way out was the elevator. It was an old machine, rusted, smelling of oil and dust. Its doors moved slowly, as if reluctant to open. The metal floor vibrated under their feet. Sarah hated it, but she had no choice. On the night of the 13th day, the air inside the apartment became unbearable, thick, damp, suffocating. Sarah told David she was going to try the elevator one last time. David begged her not to. He said he had heard chains rattling inside the shaft, followed by a heavy metallic groan. But Sarah refused to die waiting. She stepped inside. The lights flickered weakly. The button for the ground floor didn't respond. Instead, the elevator shuddered, then began to descend on its own. The screech of the cables echoed above, metal grinding against metal. Sarah clutched the railing. She pressed the buttons frantically, but none lit up. The elevator stopped on the 13th floor again. The doors opened, but the hallway was pitch black, darker than night itself. Before she could step out, the doors slammed shut. The elevator jolted violently. The sound of snapping steel cables whipped through the shaft. Sarah screamed, banging on the door. David outside pounded the call button, his voice hoarse from shouting her name. The elevator dropped. A deafening crash roared as it plummeted, each thud and shriek of tearing metal echoing like the building's death cry. Sarah's screams blended with the noise until both became one endless howl. Then silence. When David forced the doors open minutes later, he saw the crushed remains of the elevator at the bottom of the shaft. Sarah's body was pinned, mangled by twisted steel. But what froze David's blood wasn't her broken form, it was her face. Even in death, her mouth was open in a silent laugh, her eyes wide, as if something unseen had whispered victory in her ear. And above, faint but clear, came the echo of the elevator cables creaking, pulling tight again, followed by a woman's laugh that drifted down the shaft. David did not pack. He lined the gear in a row, like sleepers, cameras, batteries, mics, Tom's labeled hard drive, Lisa's roll of fluorescent tape, Kevin's cracked phone. The rules list still hung next to the punch card, 4 neat holes, and a pressure mark on 5 like a bruise in paper. David could not bear to punch it. The building would do it for him. The refrigerator breathed its soft, steady hush, like a page turning over and over. From deep in the shaft, the elevator cables gave a single low thrum, the note of a muscle flexing in iron. He opened his notebook to the last page and wrote their names again, as if writing them in the same order could bring them back in the same order. Tom, Lisa, Kevin, Sarah. He left space after his own, not for hope, but for accuracy. Then he stood and faced the room that faced him back. Not a curse, he said, because Kevin had needed someone to argue with. A system. He looked at the window, at the taped latch, at the mirror's sugared fracture, at the electrical closet, with its satisfied quiet. The building had methods. It preferred verbs that made bodies participate. Somewhere above a single footstep pressed the ceiling cottony careful and passed on. At 1:13 p.m., the intercom down the hall buzzed its mosquito-thin zzz and cut itself short, embarrassed to be noticed. He set a camera on the island and pointed it toward the living room, framing the window as if it were a person who might interrupt. He set a second one low, aimed at the hallway to see the elevator's door if it opened. He did not turn them on yet. He needed one more page. 13 days, he wrote. A floor that exists when believed in. Proof 4. He did not write 5. He wrote, a woman allege. Not a dare. A decision. Then he underlined decision until the papers showed the texture of wood beneath it. The exit sign beyond the door hummed its thin, unwavering note like a green candle that sings instead of burns. When the phone in Sarah's bag vibrated for a rideshare she would never take, he flinched. The phone's little buzz fizzed out, a pocket-sized purr that turned quickly to silence. He moved to the window. The tape still held. We keep rules, he said aloud, because the room respected declarations even as it twisted them. We do not open. We do not ride alone. We do not look after 1113. He caught his own reflection in the glass. For a moment, he looked like someone who had slept, then woke into the wrong day. A light wind feathered the pane. The glass answered with a thin, almost musical whine. He closed the blind and returned to the island. Document, he told himself, and pressed record. The camera chirped its polite confirmation, and the tally light clicked on. In the duct above, air dragged once, hissing softly, as if squeezed through a narrow throat. He began to speak the way Tom had done, not to be brave, but keep shape. This is David, he said. This is day. Between 4 and 5. The floor says otherwise. He followed the camera's lens with his eyes to the mirror beyond, where shards had organized themselves into suggestion, O-P-E-N, in silver threads the way frost writes its mind on winter glass. Not tonight, he said to the mirror. Not me. From the electrical closet came a contented bee hum, steady the transformer's low vow, matching the fridges. He walked to the bedroom and stood in the doorway. The ceiling hook where a plant had once hung waited like punctuation. He touched nothing. He said all the words a counselor would have said to a stranger, and none of them to himself. Then he came back to the island and angled the main camera wider so that the window and the hall were both within the box of the future. At 3:13 p.m., the elevator stirred first a soft shiver, then the gentle slide of cable through shadow, and stopped without arriving. He looked at the punch card. The 5th circle was still whole, but his hand could feel the hole it would be. He pressed his palm to the paper and left a faint oval of warmth, a shape the card did not believe in. When evening thinned the city into graphite and pearl, he turned on the second camera. The second camera's motor purred a compliant little whir that settled right behind the sound of his breathing. He spoke again. "If anyone finds this," he said, then swallowed, because there was no way to aim the story away from the reader he wanted and toward the reader he feared. "If anyone finds this, leave the number 13 alone when it wants to be alone." The kettle on the back burner gave a small anticipatory hiss before remembering it was empty and falling quiet. He walked the rooms one last time. Lisa's tape still fluttered slit and tidy. Kevin's mirror leaned against the wall, mended with painter's tape that did nothing. Sarah's mug held a half-moon stain. Tom's tripod stood like a guard who had promised to stay until relieved. The building issued a long level creak, wood and steel agreeing on the night. He returned to the island and wrote in block letters across the last inch of paper, "I will not be the method." Then he tore the page out and tucked it into the front of the notebook where he could see it. Something small ticked in the wall, 1-2 like a relay, choosing a side. He felt the shift before he heard it, the way a key turns in a door you thought was only painted on. The air cooled a degree. The room leaned a breath. The rule arranged itself around him as neatly as a shirt his mother once tucked in before a school picture. From down the hall, the elevator bell chimed, once wrong key, wrong era, and the cables answered with a taut, low hymn. "No," he said, because Kevin had taught the room that word. He moved to the window, laid his palm flat, felt the faint throb of outdoor wind under glass. The taped latch gave a papery crackle as the sash tested itself against the frame. "Not me," he said again. He looked at the ceiling hook and looked away. He looked at his hands and did not raise them. He looked at the cameras, both blinking their red eyes, and felt the story shift its weight from foot to foot, like an impatient host. A distant horn crossed the river, a long vowel pulled thin by water and distance. Somewhere above that single neighbor's step came and went, a soft thump folded into plaster. He could have run. The stairs would have delivered him to the same hallway arranged differently. The elevator would have opened and closed to no one. The window would have asked politely once. The mirror would have spelled the rest. He did none of it. He faced the island and spoke to the lens. "Her decision," he said softly. Not a dare. He did not say he understood. He did. Behind him, a curtain ring snapped one bright metallic tick, as if a bead had leapt on a string. He took the notebook and held it up. "For those who came," he said, and could not finish, because the room preferred complete things and took completion as an invitation. The exit sign droned its steady, small green tone. The refrigerator clicked, hummed, and steadied. The elevator cables drew tight with a faint, insistent sing-steel speaking to gravity. He stepped out of the frame, not far, just enough to unwrite a sentence he didn't want to see printed, and the room wrote it anyway. The ceiling hook became a period. The shadow became a parenthesis. The floor agreed. There are ways a building can take a person without spectacle, the way a sea can take a footprint. It was like that. The camera did not lurch. It did not gasp. The frame did not tilt to spare. It stayed obeying the rule Tom had loved: keep rolling. Be honest about the distance between what happens and what you can hold. In the bedroom, a hanger fell with a tiny clack on wood. In the hall, the elevator's side doors whispering apart and together in a single breath. In the living room, the blind cords gave a small thrumming buzz as air shifted. Minutes later, how many no one counted the cameras found their last job. The interval timer on Tom's old body turned, and the lens panned incrementally toward the window. The motor inside the tripod head purred a soft servo whir like a cat deciding to stay. The wind pressed once at the pane. The glass sang that thin, held note again. The taped latch clicked 1-2, and the seal answered with a sticky kiss of weather strip. The window did not throw itself open. It opened with manners, as if accepting an invitation it had written. The blind inhaled and exhaled. The city cleared its throat in lights. From the shaft, the elevator shook itself, steel cables scraping minutely in its saddles. Eskek then settling. A hairline crack chased itself across the mirror with a crystalline tick, then another letters aligning that no one needed to read. The second camera caught the ceiling hook and the quiet beneath it. No bodies, no motion, just a space shaped like a decision. Somewhere between the walls, a cable grew tight and held singing a thin, bright wire note that braided with the low, tired hum of the transformer. The two pitches made a chord you could almost hum back if you were the kind of person who hums to ceilings. Out beyond the glass, the river shoved a silver shoulder into night. In here, the apartment settled into the arrangement it had wanted, since a woman's feet found a ledge, and her hands did not. The cameras kept their red eyes open the way sentries do in stories. The room listened. Then the laugh came soft, at first a ribbon of sound, sliding through the open window, rising lightly, as if climbing its own staircase. It brightened not loud, just near a woman's mirth, practiced into myth, and drifted the length of the floor that sometimes exists. In answer, the elevator murmured a patient creak, a yes, in the language of weight and counterweight. The recording did not end. It did not need to. The last frame belonged to the window half open, as if someone had stepped through air and left it ajar out of courtesy. The punch card above the microwave, unattended obedient, now showed 5 holes. And very faintly from nowhere, precise steel whispered against steel, a drawn bow on a single string, as the apartment breathed out and the night breathed in.